Hi everyone, it's Rena. So this video is for those people who have their sun or rising sign, well, in some cases you might have both, in Capricorn. And if you have both in Capricorn, you must have been going through a lot of stuff in the last, maybe as far back as 12 years ago. But this is about the transit of Saturn, which is your ruler, which makes it even more important, in the sign of Aquarius. And this is going to be occurring from 2020 to 2023. Saturn is going to go into Aquarius in 2020. And I will actually be talking more about the dates that it goes retrograde and when it goes back, because it's going to be dipping back into your first house of the self. And when it goes retrograde and it goes back into your sign. And it's not going very far in 2020. It's only going to 1 degree of Capricorn. So, Aquarius. I'm thinking so much about your sign and how many transits there are at the moment. So anyway, Saturn is the planet of structure, of creating structures that or foundations that serve you for the long term. And this is in contrast to Jupiter. Right now we have both Saturn and Jupiter in Capricorn. And Jupiter is a planet of eat, drink, and be merry today. It's just very much about abundance, but sometimes very what Saturn would call wasteful, or not thinking ahead, just kind of living in the moment, enjoying the pleasure of right now, and that sense of sometimes even excess. And Saturn is very lean and mean, disciplined. And it's funny that the word mean, the usage that we associate it with is being not nice. But actually, there's also where it means kind of stingy. If you remember the Beatles song, Mean Mr. Mustard, it wasn't about him being mean, like not nice. It was about stinginess. And sometimes Saturn and Capricorn can be connected to, can be accused of that. And this is because there's a conservational energy surrounding both Saturn and the sign it rules, Capricorn. And yet, Aquarius is also co-ruled with by Saturn, along with Uranus. So you have, with the Uranian energy, you have something very kind of unpredictable and nonconformist, rebellious, and then you have Saturn that's very disciplined, traditional, and conservative. And it's interesting because you might think that traditional and conservative are synonyms, and I suppose in a particular context they could be, but I'm referring to, when I say conservative, I mean conserving resources. And so this means like being very careful financially. And traditional I'm using to mean those conservative or old-fashioned values that we see with certain people. But I like the idea of conservative to mean conservation. So for you, it's funny that I'm talking about money and things like that, because Saturn is going to go from your first house of the self, where it is right now, to the second house of earned income, as well as your values and your self-esteem. So this is, I think most people, though, think of the second house as a money house, because it is the money that you earn, although I would keep that wide open, because it can, in my experience, with the Jupiter transit in that house, I saw an increase in money, even though it was coming from a source that I did not earn. So just labeling in a money house is good enough. And so the second house is ruled by Venus and through the sign of Taurus. And it's an earth house, and Saturn rules that 10th house, which is also an earth house in Capricorn. So it's not that Saturn feels out of place being in an earth house, but when we're talking about what Venus represents versus Saturn, we couldn't be more diametrically opposed. Venus is about luxury. Venus is about pleasure. And Saturn can sometimes, I think, get pleasure from deprivation in a way. And there's also a very kind of a frugal attitude that's coming from Saturn. So this transit for the next 2.5 to 3 years favors you laying down a foundation for your money. Now, Capricorn probably already has that. You may have done so when you were quite young, that you developed a great ability to save money, not just actually taking the money that you received as gifts. I'm talking about as a kid, and keep them and not spend that money, but also in terms of being very intentional with the money that you did spend. And but I mean, there's always room for improvement, isn't there? No matter who you are or what your financial status is. And there will always be some Capricorns. Maybe you have some inner planets in Sagittarius that are much more, excessive in that area, or a moon sign that favors more of an indulgence like Libra, or I don't know, Taurus even. Taurus, Libra, what else? And a fire sign like Leo or Aries, Sagittarius, of course. But in any case, this can be a great time also for looking at your, like for some Capricorns, you may be like, one of the Capricorn types who finds that it's very hard to attract money. And one thing to note is that Capricorns can be artists or healers, and sometimes those types of intuitive individuals have a thing about money. And there's like a real block when it comes to money, and an attitude that money is profane or something along those lines. And it's understandable because there is so much exploitation in this world. And so I could see that there might be Capricorns out there. You might be kind of the minority, but you might exist where you feel that you want to be more altruistic, and yet you find it hard to meet your own needs at the level that you would like to. So this can be a great time to really kind of solidify your sense of self-esteem, because sometimes these attitudes may really be hiding self-esteem issues, and they're kind of being touted as spiritual beliefs. I'm not saying that that's going to be true 100% of the time, because there definitely can be people out here who are not greedy and who really do care about providing a service to other people and not charging an arm and a leg for it, not just doing that, and they really have sincere motives, and it's not because of lack of self-esteem. I'm saying it could be, and it could be a very sophisticated, kind of like hidden thing going on there, attitudes going on. Definitely when Pluto enters your second house in a few years, in Aquarius, in 2023 to be exact, you will probably really see this face to face, because Pluto doesn't take any prisoners, is very much about tearing down worn out patterns. Saturn is more about streamlining things, I would say, although some people who are not flying right may notice that they actually have quite a plummet in some kind of a financial thing. That's why it's good to use these transits not as the gospel, but even you could even use them as an excuse to do something at a certain time. You don't have to believe in the transits, or they may not even present themselves to you in a certain way that really goes along with what I'm talking about here. And yet you could still, look at that and say, oh, am I, with my business, am I really doing things as economically as I could be doing them? And this does include, how much you charge for your services, your overhead and things like that. So it's certainly the case that there may be, for some people with the Saturn in the second house, feelings of restriction that involve their money. And it is a pain in the butt. Like, even if you've experienced a Saturn retrograde, or, even like a Venus retrograde in a money house, you will see sometimes, or a Jupiter retrograde, you will see some of these things play out. And there's it blows my mind sometimes how much that can really be the case. And it's a little bit frustrating because we want to obviously make as much money as we can, or as we are used to, at least the same amount. And when things seem like they're really becoming obstructed, it can feel out of control. You know what I mean? And we feel like we're being punished, or that life is against us. And so that's one of the beautiful things about astrology, I feel, is not to treat it like a literal thing that this is going to happen on this date, because it might not, but to just see the general trend of it and to see how this may impact you based on what is happening to you right now, because it's an ongoing story. It's not like when Saturn actually enters your second house, which, by the way, is not going to be on March 21st for everybody, because some people have different second houses. I mean, some people may have some Capricorn in their second house. And so Saturn may enter in a late degree of Capricorn, and that's when it officially enters your second house. So the point is that we're looking at this in a general way, and when it does enter your second house, you have to look at the first house, because that's where you have learned about general structure in your life at this point. Now that Saturn is in the first house, it's a transit of getting your life together in general. And then we go into the issue of the finances and the self-esteem on the emotional or psychological level. And, another thing too is that if you're somebody who has if you're like a hoarder, and it doesn't even have to be like to the absolute extreme, but if you know that you have a lot of clutter, things that you don't use, and you're just like, you feel kind of anxious about it because you haven't gotten rid of it, this is a time when something may conspire, the universe may conspire to have you pare down these possessions. I think that was the word I was looking for about Saturn, is paring down. Saturn doesn't like excess. And the second house can be your, the things that you own. And so it's a really great time for that. And especially since Jupiter, well, I'll talk about that in a minute, because Jupiter is also going to enter this second house. And you don't want to still have those habits of, too many things, kind of like being possessed by your possessions is a phrase that is used. A lot of Capricorn, if your sun is in Capricorn, especially, I would say, you're somebody who probably is not like this, that you are more likely to have the kind of environment that is very Spartan, is very kind of, we could say, minimalist, to begin with. And so that's not in your nature to be like that. But again, there may be influences that kind of counter that. Your sun is in Capricorn, your rising sign is Leo, and you want to show everybody that you've got all this stuff. Or your rising sign is Taurus, or your rising sign is Libra. Libra is a sign that likes to live large. Okay, so I want to talk about some of these dates. So Saturn goes into Aquarius on March 21st, and then goes retrograde on May 11th. And at that point is only at 1 degree of Aquarius. So it doesn't get very far in almost 2 months. When a planet is retrograde, it stations retrograde, and you will see sometimes that it stays at that 1 degree for, a considerable amount of time. And that's what happens when Saturn goes retrograde. It stays at that 1 degree mark. And it finally goes back into Capricorn on July 2nd. So that means it's dipping back into your first house. And then on September 29th, Saturn goes direct at 25 degrees of Capricorn. And it takes until December 18th for Saturn to go back into Aquarius, back into your second house. So we're talking about right before the winter solstice, at least in the northern hemisphere, southern summer in the southern. And the really cool thing, I thought, is that on the 18th it goes into Aquarius. The very next day, Jupiter goes into Aquarius as well. So they are both in Aquarius, and for a few days they're both at the same degree. What's the significance of that? Well, they're both in your second house. One is attracting blessings, luck, expanding your finances, expanding your sense of self-esteem, and the other one is very disciplined. And even though they seem like they would work against each other, there is that factor of them being able to give you their own their own particular positive influences. So that's really cool, and I like that quite a bit. And I hope that you're looking forward to this Capricorn, especially since it's your ruler. I think that that has to be seen as, quite significant. So, in any case, if you would like a personal reading, if you are listening for your sun sign and you don't know where your rising sign is, and you haven't never read a chart before, I would love to do a natal chart interpretation for you and talk more about some of these things. My website is rainamoonastrology.com. The link is below. Take care. Bye.